1 in 27 people in the United Kingdom today, 1 in 27 of them has arrived in the past 2 years. Now, not all of those people have come from high capital backgrounds where they have a lot to offer. Not all of them come from cultures that are culturally compatible with Western values. Why have we allowed in so many people from backgrounds that are not culturally compatible with Britain? Here's another shocking statistic, and it needs to be spelt out. 40% of foreign-born people in the United Kingdom have arrived in the United Kingdom in the past 10 years. When did we discuss this? When were we allowed to talk about this? When were we allowed to debate whether or not we want this many people to come from Middle Eastern backgrounds, from Muslim backgrounds, from culturally incompatible backgrounds? We've never been allowed to have this discussion. I'm having this conversation with you. I was a member of parliament for 12 years. Not once would the BBC have ever entertained the idea that I should be able to discuss these things. And had I ever attempted to discuss them on the BBC, I would have been yelled down and shouted down and called a racist. Clearly, we need to have this conversation. Are we going to accept this vast number of people to come and settle in our country? And if we are going to allow large numbers of people to settle in our country, can we at least discuss whether or not they should come from countries that are culturally compatible? I would put it to you that a second and third generation Pole is far more likely to be indistinguishable from a Brit than a second or third generation person from a Middle Eastern Islamic background. It's not just me saying this. There's good data that now shows this. There's a study I was looking at from Denmark, and it showed a shocking statistic. It looked at the number of Danish-born, these are second-generation Danes from different ethnic backgrounds. And it discovered that 70% of Danish-born Q80s have got a criminal record by the age of 30. These are male. 70% of ethnic Q80s born in Denmark have a criminal record by the age of 30. With Ethiopians, it's nearly 70%. With Ugandans, it's well over 60%. Now, that suggests to me that if you have people from certain backgrounds settling in your country, it's not automatic that the second generation is going to assimilate and integrate. In fact, what the Danish study showed is that records of criminality are higher amongst the second generation than the first generation. In a British context, we need to ask, are the second and third and fourth generation Pakistani migrants living in towns like Blackburn more or less integrated than the first generation? I'd put it to you that they're probably less integrated. So can we now have a conversation about cultural compatibility? We need to recognize that there are millions of people around the world who want to come to this country. Why, for goodness sake, are we not able to choose people from culturally compatible backgrounds with high skills that we want? What have we allowed to happen? What has the government done? We have in the UK a very large number of people who've settled in the UK. They're a net drain on the public purse. They're culturally incompatible. And we've not been allowed to have a conversation about this in a measured and calm way.
I actually think it's worse than that, because I think that we voted on this in 2015, in 2016, in 2017, in 2019. Yeah. And the British people every time voted to decrease mass migration. And we've been migration. So we did have we didn't have the conversation in the media classes. You can't have it around here in Westminster. The people have made it abundantly clear what they want.
And we've been constantly told that migration is good for you. Migration can be good for you. I'm a migrant to the United States myself. But migration done legally, and when it is through a process that looks rationally at what skills it is that a person brings. Instead, what we've had is a refusal to discuss that there are downsides, economic downsides to migration. I mean, I put it to you that something like 47% of occupants of social housing in London are foreign-born. 47%. Are we really sure that we want to create a situation where a huge chunk of social housing, government housing in this country, in our capital city, is housing people who are foreign-born? When did we have a discussion about this? When did we have a conversation about this? So we need to discuss not just the economic downsides to mass migration, of which there are plenty, how to have a migration system that attracts high capital value people, and cultural compatibility. I would put it to you that perhaps migrants from Hong Kong may have a higher net value to this country, both culturally and economically, than migrants from other parts of the world. So why can't we prioritize migrants from certain parts of the world over and above others? We need to have this conversation.
I actually know the Hong Kong issue quite well because I did a bunch of work on helping assimilate Hong Kongers to Britain. And it's a bit of a fallacy to think that they were economically a benefit, because actually we ended up attracting a lot of young Hong Kongers before they had developed a career. However, what is true is that to be a Hong Konger is to wear a British hat as well as a Chinese hat, and you have this new Hong Konger hat. About something like half of the Hong Kongers that came, and there were about 150,000, were Christian. And even though they never had democracy in Hong Kong, they were coming here because they believe in democracy, because they wanted democracy. So there's so many aspects of being Hong Konger that sits so nicely with being British. And also, of course, Hong Kong was never a country before the British. British created Hong Kong in the 1840s. So anyway, it's an interesting pipot of, and it has gone well. It's only been a few years, but the Hong Kong assimilation is going well in the UK. Do you think that another problem is the speed? You've alluded that the speed of immigration, people coming to this country. It seems to me impossible that this would even apply to the Hong Kongers. Hong Kongers are forming little enclaves. There's a little Hong Konger, there's a place in Sutton, there's a part in Manchester where the Hong Kongers all go into one place. Because the speed is what it is, whereas maybe 50 years ago, if you were going to emigrate to Britain, you would end up being on a street full of British people, and so you were forced to become part of that culture. Now, there are parts of the country, we saw this with Hare Hills, only this last month. We saw this with Rochdale. They're not even necessarily speaking English. And if you didn't speak English, why would you go to an English place? You'd find the easier place. So I sort of understand why they'd go there.
With 4 out of 10 foreign-born people settling in Britain in the past 10 years, this is bound to happen. I mean, if you look at where the civil unrest has been, and let's be clear, people who destroy private property and riot should go to jail. That ought to be so obvious it doesn't need saying, but perhaps it does need saying. Your motives are not important. If you behave like that, you should go to jail. However, the distribution of the unrest, I think, reflects the fact that you are seeing such a large influx. Previously,
are you talking now about the patriot unrest? That I use the term patriot because there's sort of various different movements going on all at once. There's a lot of link between them all, but there's different groups. So there's a kind of indigenous British patriot movement. Are you referring to that, or are you referring to the Muslim Defence League, or are you referring to what
I'm referring to the ethnically British thugs in places like Liverpool who are attacking the police and that unrest. And I think Hull and Aldershot. I suspect that the reason why we're seeing this is because there's such a large influx of people, and they are being distributed in more provincial towns. Previously, migrants would have headed to London or Birmingham. We're seeing so many migrants coming in and being housed, asylum seekers being housed in so many different parts of the country, that communities that previously didn't see the consequences of mass immigration have now started to see it. And this is why it's become such an issue on the ground.